Hello, I'm, excuse me. Hello, Hello, I'm Dr. John Cruz, and today I'm going to be talking about emotional support animals and service animals, whether ADHD qualify, they can help individuals with ADHD. So I'll be talking for about 20 minutes or less. If you have questions while I'm speaking, you can type them in. This will be posted later on both YouTube and Facebook, and questions can be asked there as well. So I usually start with the takeaway message, and the takeaway message is, although there are dozens and dozens of companies offering services to give documentation for emotional support animals, to train animals, to help to be service animals for individuals with ADHD, there's actually not a lot of hard research on the matter. There's probably more research on horses helping with ADHD than with dogs or other animals, but the information we have looks supportive, and there's lots of logic and observational based information that suggests these can be powerfully helpful for some individuals with ADHD. So to start off, it's important to distinguish between service animals and emotional support animals. So the 1990 Americans with Disabilities Act had a section declaring or creating the federal official existence of what are called service animals, and specified quite clearly that emotional and mental health disorders could qualify you, or some of the qualifying conditions, and specifically ADHD is one of those mental health conditions that was specifically included in the ADHD, Americans with Disability Act's ADA, as a covered entity or covered condition. Now so the category of emotional support animals is not a category that's included in the ADA, and there's a variety of different states give a recognition. Different municipalities or local entities can have official designations of emotional support animals, and there may be a variety of different standards, criteria for them. So in the ADA, you needed a specific diagnosis, and again, ADHD is included there. And then for a service animal, the animal has to be trained to serve a specific function that is related to that disability or diagnosis, and that helps improve functioning or decrease distress with that specific intervention the animal is trained to do. So in the ADA further clarifies that service animal, if it is truly a service animal, then an individual with that animal, the animal has access to a variety of public venues. It has access to travel accommodations, housing accommodations, education. It doesn't mean you can take your service animal out everywhere. So religious institutions, for example, are exempt from the ADA. They do not have to follow or allow your dog into a mosque or a church or a synagogue. Some other things about the ADA, and most people are aware that there are limited questions an individual who's a gatekeeper for those institutions or a clerk in a store can ask. So there's only 2 questions that someone's allowed to ask you regarding your animal. One is this animal, are you bringing this animal in because of a disability? So they're allowed to ask you that. They're not allowed to ask you what the disability is. They're not allowed to ask you for documentation. And then the second they are allowed to ask, what task is this animal trained for? Now, very often, revealing what the task is may give away a fair amount of information about what the disability is, but they're not officially allowed to ask about the disability. They're not allowed to ask for certification or identification. The dog does not, or other animal does not have to wear tags or patches or collars or other things that would designate it as a service animal. I'd say on a practical level, most owners of service pets do have collars, ID tags, and carry documentation with them just in case people who aren't aware of what the rules are start asking them for those, or because it makes them feel more comfortable should they be questioned or asked or interviewed, or because it simply blocks lots of questions from coming up. So in 2011, so just about a year ago, the Department of Transportation issued new guidelines and clarifications, making it very clear that an emotional support animal is not considered a service animal and is, for transportation purposes, considered a pet. So if it's a service dog, they're not allowed to charge you for an extra seat. Again, they have to let you into a hotel, housing, public restaurants, hospitals. That doesn't mean they have to give that service dog the same rights as a human. So you can't ask that your dog be allowed to sit at the table and eat food from the table at a restaurant, but they have to allow the dog into the restaurant. So jumping up to the emotional support animals, that's again a much broader category. There are dozens and dozens of companies that for a fee will help you get certified or get a license or get a certificate documentation that your animal is an emotional support animal. And there's a paucity of case law in most jurisdictions. So at a practical level, there's often blurring of what's an emotional support animal and what's a service animal. So in many areas, I'm in San Francisco right now for one more week. If you have an emotional support animal, most landlords will treat that as a service animal. They will not try to evict you. They will consider it an allowed entity. Most restaurants won't try to, again, keep your dog out. But there's been very little case law, and part of it is that neither the animal rights activists want to be told, no, these really are pets and you can't bring them all these places, and the landlords and other entities fear that bringing the cases like this to court, because then there may be a clear ruling that in fact it is clear and undeniable that they have to allow these animals in a way similar to a service animal. So a lot of this is on sort of shaky or tenuous or assumptive legal grounds. Backing away from that, let's talk about why in the world would you want a dog for your if you have ADHD? I mean, isn't that the epitome of, if your problem is distractibility, isn't the dog the epitome of, oh, there's a squirrel? I mean, isn't it going to drive you more off track, make you more distracted, make you more impulsive? So there is a fairly substantial literature showing the benefits of pet ownership, including health and mental health benefits. So there's studies showing pet owners are likely to have lower blood pressure, lower cholesterol, lower levels of anxiety and depression, help with PTSD. There's only a very few studies looking, and it's mostly not looking at pet ownership, it's looking at specific therapies where a few hours a week kids or adults are in companionship or doing specific tasks and training with a dog. There's actually, at least on a quick PubMed look, easier to find studies on horse training or being with horses, equine therapy, and ADHD. And again, this isn't having a horse with you or bringing your horse onto the airplane. This is specific therapies involving these animals that can help measurably, at least with, again, these have been small studies, but specific ADHD surveys, their measures were included in some of these studies. Executive function scores were looked at some of the horse studies, and they're reducing, again, these are small, so it's hard to generalize from just a small number of studies, but it does appear there may be, these therapies might be able to improve specifically ADD symptoms, reduce executive function deficits, and clearly help with anxiety, socialization, and panic anxiety states. So a little bit of why might, at a broader level, having an emotional support pet help, particularly a dog, help with their ADHD. And one of the biggest problems with people with ADHD is poor time management, poor scheduling, things not getting done, things getting done erratically, things, bedtime, dinner, meals, homework getting done too late to be done effectively. And an animal usually imposes some amount of schedule. Animals need to be fed regularly. They need to be walked for exercise regularly. They need to be taken out for urination, defecation, other practices. And most people find it easier to take care of and be responsible for an entity outside of themselves. It makes it easier to see the imposition of a schedule, not just as an imposition, but that you're doing it as an act of caring. I would argue that even for themselves, a schedule is an act of caring and not an imposition of evil tasks, interfering with spontaneity. So scheduling is one big area having a pet can help with. A simple second one is exercise, that having a pet, needing particularly again a dog, but even playing with a cat or other animals, may be a way of channeling some of the hyperactivity, excess energy, and we also know that general health, being more physically fit, helps people manage depression better, helps manage anxiety, and some evidence for ADHD as well. So exercise is an inherent value of most pets. Several studies indicate that having a pet increases socialization and social opportunities in sort of two big directions. If you're out there with a pet, most people are more approachable or seen as more approachable, more interactive. The pet is a magnet for social interaction, so that may reduce some barriers to meeting people, seeing people. And the pet can serve as in one of my other previous talks, I talked about social anxiety being an attention problem. And by that I mean your attention is focused on your own sensations, your perception of how others are judging you, and having a pet is a useful distraction from that. Your attention can be focused on caring and taking care of your pet rather than how other people are worrying about their perceptions of you. A fourth area where pets can be helpful is that, whether we call it love, or we call it non-judgmental companionship, whether we call it support or appreciation, most pet owners feel that they have a strong bond with their animal. Many of them, particularly dogs, feel less lonesome because of it. They feel that they have someone with them who appreciates them, who values them, who gives them positive feedback, who gives them non-judgmental reinforcement. And that's important, particularly since many studies indicate ADHD doesn't mean you have to be lonely, but it increases the likelihood for loneliness. It increases the likelihood, or the number of friends you may have and the strength of those friendship connections. So a pet may be a very important figure in someone's life in that regard. So are any reasons against, and clearly over the last several decades, the number of both service animals and emotional support animals has blossomed, and there's, it's in 30, 40 years ago, it would be rare to see animals on a bus, on a train, on a cafeteria, within the hospital, in a restaurant, and now it's unusual, at least in many urban areas, not to see those everywhere. So there's clearly been a proliferation of support and service animals, and possible objections to it is one on the basis of sanitation. Usually that there are a number of pathogens, of bacteria, viruses. Cats have been shown to be, and hamsters more recently, carriers for coronavirus recently. So having pets in all these places can certainly augment potentially the spread of certain diseases. So one thing, getting back to that, the American Disabilities Act in service animals, it allows your animal to have access to, say, a gym or a facility with a swimming pool. It does not overrule, and clearly explicitly says that local health ordinances. So if your city says dogs can't be in the pool, even a service animal then is not allowed to go in the pool. So, and that's again for sanitation reasons. Another reason is that increasingly there are numbers of people who are allergic, including very strongly allergic to dogs and cats, and particularly if you're in a closed space like an airplane or other building, the presence of that animal, even though it's enabling the functioning or decreasing the distress of one individual, may be causing a real physical health problem in another individual. The third area, it's sort of going more broadly from that in terms of what injury or damage or problems it can cause. There are some significant numbers of people who have strong fears of animals, and often particularly dogs, particularly bigger dogs, not always correlated with size. Some of these people have been injured or attacked or have seen other people attacked or hurt by animals. Others develop excessive fears based on other reasons or unknown reasons. And a social and legal question is, do dog owners have the right to inflict their relationship with their dog on others in the general public who may again be particularly traumatized or fearful of their interactions? And one thing to note there is maybe particularly reluctant or fearful of bringing up their own fears. So as a society, we are certainly still grappling with these issues and where the boundaries and borders are. I'm not seeing any questions coming in, but I will probably wrap things up right there. Next week's topic is on jumping over to depression and the default mode network, and why and understanding the default mode network is probably more important than jumping into stories about serotonin or norepinephrine or dopamine in explaining depression right now. So I will end right now and have a good and healthy, happy week. This is the last time you're going to see me in this office. Bye.